Hey, dreamers, and welcome to Dreamers Unite, the talk show for dreamers. I am always grateful when you come to this channel to spend time with me. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe. Hit that blue bell for more uplifting, elevating, and motivational content. And if it is your first time here, I want to say welcome. Well, we are in the month of October, though it's almost over. We are still in the month of October, and it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And it's an important conversation to have. And today I have an advocate and survivor. Her name is Tonya Lovelace, and she is the president and CEO of Lovelace Consulting Services, Inc. She is going to raise our awareness of domestic violence. She is also going to share her journey of being in the movement for 35 years. So without further ado, I am going to bring on Tonya Lovelace. Hey, Tonya, welcome to Dreamers Unite.
Hi there, Sherri. I'm glad to be here a second time now tonight, right?
Yes, this is the second time. Okay, so if you caught the first, usually I go live, or my show is always live at 7. Well, we had an interesting technical snafu. Okay. So, Tonya, you want to tell them what happened?
So I did not know that if you have another browser on and YouTube, even though it's just sitting there and you're not in any video, if you go live with someone, anything else that's going live will play at the same time. So the echo and the extra voices were coming from my laptop. And because I was in a different browser, as opposed to the one I usually use, I didn't see it here on my screen. So I didn't know something else
was. Well, what I can say is
a lesson. It's a lesson.
Yeah, it's a lesson. And you know, what I can say, not to cut you off, Tonya, but I wanted to say it was really pretty funny. It was really a good blooper to save, I think. And last week I had on, rip roaring fun comedian Arisha, and I said, well, I guess we continued the comedy time. So we are going to get serious now, though, and we are going to take a deep dive into this important issue and this important subject. So, Tonya, let's just start with defining what is domestic violence.
So, domestic violence is a pattern of many behaviors directed at achieving and maintaining power and control of an intimate partner, such as physical violence. It includes emotional abuse. It includes isolation, economic abuse, intimidation, coercion, threats, any range of things. And it's important to know that it happens across all gender identities, all sexual orientations, races, ethnicities, ages, localities, economic standing. It can happen to any and everyone.
Mm-hmm. That is important to note for sure. And what are some of the causes of domestic violence so that we can be a little bit clearer?
Well, some of the causes has to do with folks having potentially low self-esteem. And let me be clear. It's always a tough topic to ask what are the causes, because there are so many causes, Sherri, and there are so many reasons and so many backdrops. And I don't want someone to listen to what I say and tick it off and say, oh, well, that's not mine, that's not him, and that's not her. So that's not it, right? So I want to be very clear that there are any myriad of reasons, but I will share a few, right? And so some of the things could very well be low self-esteem, could very well be a history of being physically abused themselves, and or being physically abusive in younger ages that carried over into relationships. It can be emotional dependence and insecurity that started through abandonment and other reasons for their lives and their life experiences.
Mhm.
It can be very often, it's a belief in strict gender roles. And strict gender roles, again, can be across LGBT communities, across identities. So there's no one specific thing. And I think I'll just name a couple of others, which are often, what often shows up are things like jealousy and possessiveness, a need and a willingness to track the movements and behaviors and monitoring someone. And then I will finally list that economic factors
Yeah,
often also play. And do you mind if I mention some things specifically around Black community?
I think you should definitely do that for
And
sure.
so I think, historical trauma and racism are a huge factor in our experiences. If
Mhm.
you look at the slavery institution, you can really look at the fact that those of us who those our ancestors, those of us who have ancestors that were enslaved, they were on the land in which the person who was in ownership owned. Typically those were, and quite frankly, I think at the time only white men could own land, right? And so white
Mhm.
men owning land, which also meant that they technically owned their wife, they technically owned their kids, and then they technically owned the people, the African bodies that were on their land too. And
Yeah.
so that in and of itself is a domestic violence environment. So pretty much anything that you would see within the domestic violence context is what happened to us within a slavery context. And so that violence happening to us, it would make sense then that would then show up on a
Yes.
continuous basis over the hundreds of years, both while on within the slavery context and
Mhm.
then within our own homes later. And this is not just for us, folks who've experienced historical trauma within their communities of color
Mhm.
who lived within a violence context often find that those behaviors are reinforced within their communities. And this doesn't mean that we are more violent. It
Yeah.
just means that we have greater factors, socioeconomic factors, and environmental factors that create an environment that may make it more that may make it so that gives another reason why violence may be happening in our communities.
Right. So where can um, someone go if they are in fact being abused?
What I often tell people is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. If all else fails, if you don't know about the local domestic violence program in your
Mhm.
community,
Mhm.
um, 800-799-7233 is a national domestic violence hotline, or 800-799 safe. And I think we can keep saying that to folks throughout
Yes.
the show.
I'm gonna try to put up a banner for it.
It would
Okay.
be wonderful.
Okay.
And so I say that is great. And then they also have a website called thehotline.org. You can go on there and you can also engage in chat. So you can do a chat exchange, as well as make a phone call. You can also do this anonymously. You don't have to say who you are, but you can ask for the resources in your community. You can do the same if you know or access to the domestic violence hotline within your community. And most likely you live near or close to a community, close to some type of services. Unfortunately, I think rural communities have the least access. I think tribal communities have the least access. And so I want to make that I don't want to make it seem as if everyone has the same access.
Yes.
But I would say that even in those communities, making a phone call might get you one step closer to getting the type of support you need and getting the type of safety planning assistance you need.
Mhm.
Because it doesn't always mean that you are able or in a position to leave right then.
That's
And
right.
therefore, it really means that it takes time to build a safety plan, and one that allows you to gather your materials that you would have in a safe place, or copies of your ID, copies of your birth certificate. And they don't always allow copies, but
Mhm.
always having, both the originals as well as copies, I think is just a helpful thing. A change of clothes, having your children, if you have children, be aware that they should not get involved with the violence, that they should not get involved in any verbal exchange that are happening, um,
Mhm.
and that they should also be prepared to leave at some point. And I know that's tough information,
Yeah.
but it is important safety planning information to have.
It's definitely important information, and I wanna talk about the kids a little bit. So how young is too young to have that conversation?
So I want to say I am not a child. I don't, my work isn't primarily with children in this work.
Right,
I
right.
have many wonderful colleagues, and in fact, we might need to talk about some folks that you might want to bring on in the future.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, truly. But what I can say in general is, um, I think it's up to the parent, the survivor parent,
Mhm.
to assess what is the appropriate or proper conversation and the appropriate and proper language to use with their child and
Mhm.
with their children. And I think it's age appropriate. And I think that what is being said to a 3-year-old might be said differently to a 10-year-old and might be said differently to a 17-year-old, right? So
Mhm.
I think that just like you would anything else. So I think that the range of information is there, but I do also think that it is important that to understand that if you think the children don't know,
Mhm.
that's not the case. Most
Yeah.
likely, children are aware. I have a lot of friends who dive really deep into and are child witnesses themselves. I know that there are various programs and folks that are doing having these conversations, and I know that that is a part of what they are making very clear is that the children know.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're smart. Even little age of 3, they can sense. 2 and 3, even babies, I think, can sense something. They certainly don't have any words, and they might not know, but, they know something is uncomfortable. Yeah.
Well, let me say that, and it's not always, as you know, not just the physical abuse that this can occur in. It is
Yeah.
often the verbal and the emotional abuse that occurs,
Mhm. Mhm.
and children are aware of that too.
Yes. Yes. So, I wanna touch on that deeper, but I wanna go to right now, talk about COVID, what's happening right now, and that, numbers certainly have increased, with domestic violence, numbers, and what can someone that is being abused and who's suffering in the home because they're sheltered in, or maybe it's finances. So many people are out of work, or it could be a number of reasons. What offering can you perhaps give them?
So, I think that it is really tough, right? It is tough to be
Mhm.
isolated for any of us, right?
Yeah.
But it's even tougher for those. I mean, that's of course, first thought that went in my mind when this COVID thing went down, that survivors of all sorts of violence, right, are now often encapsulated, isolated with their abusers, whether it's child
Mhm.
sexual assault survivors, um, whether it is those who are experiencing domestic violence and the whole range of violences that can be occurring. And so,
Mhm.
it is important um, to to find ways to reduce social isolation.
Mhm.
So often, a tactic of the abuser truly is to isolate.
Mhm.
But any way that you can keep sort of social connections going over the phone or in some sort of way if it is safe to do, is
Yeah.
critical. Um, I think that adding to your safety plan, making sure that a mask is on you or available, easy grasp at any given time in case you do have to leave, and in case you need something to then keep you safe physically, out in these streets, as I would say, out in these
Yeah.
COVID streets, right? You got to have those things. Um, you may also consider, it's tough, but you may also consider that if you know where weapons are in your home and the potential of the use of weapons, then somehow, I was thinking about this earlier, and also some of this I've done some research and did some pulling. You prepared me well to think about what to consider for this conversation, but moving the violence away from the weapons. And I'm not saying that anybody is in control of what is happening. And it
Right.
makes me deeply uncomfortable to talk and say that part, but to say that if you're in a room where the violence begins and you know that that is where weapons are, somehow, if it is at all physically possible to get to a room where the weapons may not be,
Mm.
increase the possibility of weapons being used.
Yeah.
Talking to children and maybe even giving children a signal, so that they know across the ages, when it's time, when they need to leave, when they need to get help. Um, and again, reinforcing them not getting involved. Some of the things that could be occurring, very well could be that, during this COVID time, abusers already use, or folks who use abuse, I'm trying not to use abusers, but folks who use abuse, and I probably have said abusers 5 times, but that's language I'm trying to shift. I'm not getting any younger, so the trying to make sure that I keep the language appropriate is, it's sometimes a problem, but I'm working on that. And so, but those who may use abuse or use violence, they may be utilizing now things such as threatening to cancel insurance,
Mm-hmm.
preventing survivors from getting the medical help that they need.
Yeah.
That they may be using the travel restrictions against them and saying, where are you going to go anyway?
That's right.
And then finally, they may feel more justified to maintain even more isolation in the home because of COVID. And so where you can keep those lines open, it's critical. Also, it's just not your fault that this is happening. And I just want to keep reinforcing. I may also be saying that several times.
Yeah, I think it's a great point to say as many times as needed. We have some folks on. Hey, Cece Falls, thank you so much for joining.
Oh, my girl Cece, my soror.
Yes, yes. So she asked, and I think this is great to let's go into what is included in a safety plan.
Sure. So, some of the pieces that are included in a safety plan is really thinking about, you know, everything from the physical space in your home. So some of the safety planning I was already doing in terms of where to go to get away from weapons, where might be a safe hiding place for you and your children, looking and knowing what are the exits in your home and always being possibly angled where you can. And again, I'm saying these things, and again, it's very difficult to say this, because I know from experience, right? You may not always have the access to that exit, but knowing that those things are possible. And then it may be things, again, in terms of materials. What materials do you need in order to leave if you need to leave? And so again, I'm including mask in there now, but making sure you have masks, making sure you have hand sanitizer if possible, because I keep saying he, and I want to be also clear that abuse can be happening from any gender. And so, so the person who's engaging in violence may try to keep, hand sanitizer away from you and other things, but having access, gathering those materials if you can, not being and here's the problem, when everybody's at home, how do you easily hide your gathered materials? But somehow finding a way, it may be in your shoe, it may be in a boot that you have, a knee boot that you have, It may be something, someplace where you can stuff it. It may be in the linings of things, but gathering those materials. Safety planning may be, again, having, knowing ahead of time what are the phone numbers that you might need to have.
Yeah.
And it may be knowing who are the folks in your life that you can reach out to. And it may be knowing and already having a frank conversation with someone that you know and love and feel safe having that information or knowing that information. And for folks who are being told this information, them maintaining 100% confidentiality, them not bringing any judgment, hearing and believing the person immediately, not blaming them for what is happening, and having a kind ear, and knowing that it may take multiple times for a person to quote unquote leave. And I guess what I also want to say is that not everyone's goal is to leave.
Yes.
Not everyone wants to leave. And, ultimately, survivors often just want the violence to end.
Yeah.
And may be remaining with the possibility of that, or the person who uses abuse may be making overtures and saying that they are working on it and attempting to get better and to make change. And so they may be accessing or hoping for that to happen.
Yes. Yeah.
Right now, our systems are not set up very well, right? They're not set up very well for the multiple possibilities.
Yeah. And there are so many possibilities. Again, I think having a support system is so important. And as you said, to be able to either have a friend, a relative, a safe place, a safe space, just in case, right? You would need to go somewhere, maybe in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day, to be able to have at least someone to contact. But for those people who may not have that, they could be transplants in another city or state. And now it's obviously COVID. People are, afraid. Some people are, like you said, isolating or sheltering in place, or someone may be sick with COVID that you depended on, right? That you thought was your safe place and safe space. What do you think about, or what offerings can you give for a woman that, or not just woman, for someone that needs a shelter? Is that a good place to go?
I think that there are people who see shelter as a possibility and an option. And then there are people who don't feel that it's an option. So let me first start for those who may see it as an option.
Okay.
Absolutely. Reaching out, using the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233 or 800-799-SAFE. That is a great place to thank you, CC, my sister, for putting that up there. Yeah. And so it's important for folks to know that they could access that, or if they happen to have access to or know their local domestic violence hotline. Many cities, localities have a local phone number to call. And usually the shelters will have a conversation with them and walk them through what they're experiencing. I will say that at times that there is screening that makes it so that they are taking sometimes those situations where it's the most lethal circumstances.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that it's very often that shelters are full. And that has to do with not having enough funding for those kinds of services. I will also say that there are many shelters, particularly in these times, that are beginning to utilize things like hotel vouchers and other spaces. And so hotels are often creating space for that to happen and giving vouchers for that to happen. And so they may be able to help set someone up, or they may be able to help you get to a shelter that's at a locality not far from where you are. So there are a full range of ways in which this can look. for those who, there are folks who don't feel like it's accessible. They may not feel like it's accessible because of sexual orientation, because of gender identity. They may not feel like it's accessible because of religious practice, or because they're a person of color and may not see themselves in those services. They may not feel that those services are accessible. So I want to be clear that that is possible. And I would say that that there may be other community-based places, such as a place of worship, such as community-based programs that may also have access or services, or may have other resources that you can access. To be clear, it is common for programs to have someone who knows a little bit about it, because we often go to our community centers and those spaces, and sometimes I'm sorry.
And our churches.
And so, but they may not have that much information. But that doesn't mean that they may not be willing or helpful in terms of the resource, like actually getting you funds that you might need.
Right. And that was one
shelter. Yeah.
Yes. And that's one of the questions I think you answered now that Cece asked, was how can institutions like churches and community groups be active and help and make an impact?
Well, what I would add to that is that a part of it is also getting to know and understand domestic violence, and really having, because there are sisters in every community, right? There are people in every community that knows about domestic violence, and there are programs, there are state coalitions in every state and territory. And there are community-based individuals who know about domestic violence and sexual assault, and give them information regarding that, and can help raise their awareness. And at the same time, they can exchange and share what are sort of faith-based needs, right? And so that there can be this exchange of information, or this exchange of information if it's community, if it's a community center or a cultural center, there can be an exchange of information between those systems and systems mainstream groups, or culturally specific domestic violence and sexual assault programs, meaning those programs that have been developed by and for marginalized communities or communities of color. Some of those may be in those communities as well. They could be also a great partner, and where there can be exchange of information and supporting each other. Absolutely. And I do want to say that I think that the thing about domestic violence shelters that are often useful is the level of security. And that when you go to other, meaning that they're usually, they've got the lock-in, they've got the check-in, all the things that sort of create that sort of cocoon. Not all other spaces of shelter may have that. And so that still may mean that both the person who's accessing that type of shelter, like at a church or at a community space, or being put up in a hotel, that they may have to be clear that that the type of protections are not necessarily there. So they may have to be more vigilant as survivors for their safety, as well as the folks that are supporting them.
Got it. Thank you. That is great advice for sure. Let's talk about, go back to verbal and emotional abuse, because, let's face it, some people who are being abused don't even really know it. How can someone identify if they feel like, hey, maybe I am being verbally, emotionally, spiritually, financially abused, but they're not sure? They're not sure. And can you talk about a little bit about gaslighting as well?
So I have gaslighting right up here. And as a survivor of my experience of abuse that I had was very squarely within gaslighting and other forms. And so, so verbal and emotional abuse, I would say, so verbal abuse could be, name calling. It can be yelling and screaming. It can also include intimidation in, not just yelling, but also being physically imposing. It can look like a lot of different things. as well as emotional abuse. And emotional abuse can be things like ghosting, which is, just not answering your text messages all day long. It could be not ghosting. To me, could be even silences within the home, just kind of, not coming home, or not, or even being in the home and not engaging the person, going to another part of the home and
Yeah.
just not engaging whatsoever. Gaslighting is a form of abuse that is really acts of manipulation, that would be really designed to make you question your own thoughts, your own memories,
Mhm.
or what events actually occurred, which be denying that something actually happened, even if it
Wow.
just
Yeah.
happened, right? Like, why
Mhm.
did you just slam me against the wall? Excuse me. And I do apologize for any trigger alerts. And I should have said trigger alerts. I might use some language, but, why did you just do that? And they could say, I didn't do that. You threw yourself against the wall. It could be just that quick. And it
Huh.
can be any range of things that really, is designed to make you question your own sanity.
Mhm.
My kid often says that there's a film, Gaslight, that was made that people should watch, because it kind of
Mhm.
is where that phrase comes from, where it
Yeah.
was designed, it was designed to make them feel insane. And
Yeah.
it is that same type of thing. And gaslighting is very common, as you know, on in politics. And
Yeah.
so I think the whole country can understand that
Yeah.
gaslighting is a very common experience,
And very real. Yeah.
very real.
And long lasting effects on your mental state.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. What offering for a place for healing, emotional healing, therapy, or some people may need to be uh, medicated, or are there any kind of offerings? And how do you know, like, where do you start to get healing? Is, I guess, what I should ask. Where do you start? Some people may, need other more non-traditional healers, or where can you go for that?
Well, you've just said a whole range of things.
I
And what I
did.
would
I
say is,
started adding, as I was thinking about different layers of healing.
and I'm
But
saying you're already laying it out.
yeah, I guess I am. But anything to add to that?
Yeah, to add, so one of the things I want to clarify is that mental health experiences are not necessarily synonymous with being a survivor of domestic violence, and or it may be situational in that you may be experiencing some things that could be related specifically to being a survivor in that moment, right? And I'm saying that because, so some folks already do have mental health, factors.
Right.
And I was just thinking
Right.
about that regarding therapy.
Okay.
But and that may also be getting escalated within these circumstances. But I would say almost anybody who's experiencing that type of day-to-day abuse could utilize some type of support group, some type of therapy, some type of counseling that can
Mhm.
help unravel the pieces
Yeah,
of what has happened.
that's right.
Because it is, there's an entire web that has been created around you, right? And so unraveling the web, I think, is a challenge. And so I think that those, there are often support groups at shelters and at domestic violence programs. These days, many of those things are probably gone online, are often virtual. And so there are ways to access and gain that support and assistance. I would agree that there are many different methods of practices that people engage
Mhm.
that may be non-traditional. So they may be engaging in therapy. I mean, excuse me, they may be engaging in Reiki, in meditation,
Yeah.
in guided imagery, in other holistic methods.
Yeah.
They may be engaging in in their religious practice. They may be engaging in various forms of prayer and various forms of scripture, and reading scripture, and in silent meditation. There's a range of things that people can be doing. But I do reinforce, and I think, and it's something I didn't say when you asked about COVID, and I would say that one of the most important things is doing your best to engage in as much self-care as possible.
Yes.
All the ways that you can access it. It can even be in the shower, just really ensuring that you're hugging yourself and that you are reinforcing love for yourself. And that it can even be brushing your hair and making sure you're doing it with intention, right? It could be the way you put on your clothes. It can be the way you put on your lotion, right? It can be all the ways in which you just enjoy it. And even for me these days, I've been thinking a lot about breath, as you know, both with George Floyd, with COVID, and as a person with asthma and other things, right? So to me, and have had some challenges with that, you know, to me, breath is, to me, precious, and it's political, and it's all of those things. And so I encourage, and so even breathing, being intentional about your breath and taking deep breaths throughout the day can allow you to think more clearly and to be more aware, and can be, you know, preserving. It can preserve, it can help with self-preservation.
Oh, that is wonderful. Really, those are some great offerings, Tonya. And they're things that are tangible, and they don't feel so, you know, sometimes, again, the safety plan can feel overwhelming, right? So you got to take one step at a time. And self-care at times can feel overwhelming depending on your circumstance, and whether you're kids or no kids, or whatever your, you know, job or no job can seem overwhelming. But this advice for self-care, which also is not expensive, right? It's not like you have to have money to do the things that you just mentioned.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that is awesome.
And those are things that you, not only do they not cost money, but just like, you know, I mean, I think finding ways when you know somebody is trying to take many things away from you, right? You know, and may even be trying to take your very breath, right? You can still really cherish those pieces of you that that you have, right? And to really take care of yourself and be intentional in all things for yourself. Yes.
Yes, I love that. Thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about you before we end this our wonderful conversation. Um, Tell us, how did you get on this journey? How did you get involved in the movement? How did you become an advocate? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So, I when I was one of the things I want to clarify, that I think that I want to clarify. So I have been a movement maker for 35 years.
Okay.
So I have been a movement maker since so I'm going to date myself. Since I was 19 years old, I was, you know, on a predominantly white campus, finally, and taking my first women's studies course, and really understanding, was as of like the third day, I am a woman, and I am a Black woman, and I'm a Black woman on a predominantly white campus. And it explained a lot about how I was feeling there. What were all of the things that I was feeling? And so we created, myself and a group of others created a support group for women of color, and we called it Sanctuary. And so since 19, I've been creating spaces of self-care and wellness and joy for women of color. And so I went to school, I got a master's in Black studies, and then went to a predominantly Black campus, started teaching at historically Black campus, or HBCU, Central State University, which is located in Ohio, right across from Wilberforce. And I was a recruiter there, and had begun to also had encouraged them and really fought for teaching their first women's studies course there. So it was a Black women's studies course, and really went through her story of Black. It was called Her Story. So her story of Black women, and really laying some things out. But in those courses and in those spaces, people began to reveal dating
Mhm.
violence, began to reveal domestic assault and other forms of violence. We had folks from different age groups that were there. And so dating violence, if it were folks that were there, but it was also domestic violence for folks that were either living together or who were married. And so there were a full range of things, and sexual assault. And so I began to feel that there was more that I needed in my toolkit. So I went back to grad school, got a master's in women's studies. And this is kind of how it started to build for me, and took several courses in counseling. And then when I was having my little bun in the oven, I stayed home and really tried to figure out what my next steps were. And when my kid was 5 months old, I applied for a position that was at a YWCA shelter. They needed a special needs advocate. I happened to have all of the pieces they were looking for, and I got hired.
Wow.
And I started work on the day that the OJ verdict came out was the day that I started working. So it was a very interesting time. It almost christened me, like, to be a person to bring in race, class, and gender all at the same time, because that was an interesting time for advocates who were African American, who were seeing this verdict, and we, having one feeling about it, but at the same time watching our white colleagues have a very specific response to it. And it was a very interesting time. Not long after doing that work, I started to really understand that what I was seeing was predominantly white folks at my shelter that I was working at, serving predominantly Black folks coming through the shelter. And I started to really develop this model and started to present on it, called Agency as Plantation. From there, it just kind of, my trajectory in the field just kind of has slowly moved into me going to another DV program and doing training and advocacy, court advocacy, and then very quickly doing consensus building and protocol development with police officers, judges, prosecutors, probation officers, and then building access and diversity within the programming, and then becoming going through Women of Color Network's first Leadership Academy in 2001, and becoming a staff by 2002, and then moving to Harrisburg to run it in 2004, spinning it off by 2014. And now taking this new leap where I just very recently transitioned from Women of Color Network, Inc. And now I have my own consulting firm, Lovelace Consulting Services, Inc. That is my trajectory. That's the story.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about, that's quite a journey. You have to come back. I mean, that's another deep dive we could go into with that story, with your journey, I should say. Let's talk a little bit about your new venture, your new independent venture, Lovelace Consulting Services, Inc. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yes. And so within Lovelace Consulting Services, Inc., we really endeavor to work with, to provide technical assistance, training, coaching, needs assessment, and a wide variety of services to individuals, to organizations, and to systems that are seeking transformation, various forms of transformation. And at this time, I am working with folks on anti-Blackness and anti-racism, structural racism, really helping them to look at structurally how their programs are developed around the notions of, not purposefully, but around the notions of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. And so I'm really helping them to pull apart those pieces and to look at their values that are at the very basis of their work, and help them to revise those. That's the type of work I'm doing. Executive coaching. There's a number of things that I'm doing and that I'm available to do. And so, and one of the ventures you have me doing, and that I'm excited, is moderating a film that's coming up at a film festival. So there's
an International Film Festival. I'll give a little shout out for that.
To the TNEC
Festival, yes.
I'm excited for that, and the film Belly of the Beast, and
Yeah.
just the range of of options and possibilities that it's one thing to work for a program, for a nonprofit, or and needing to sort of hold your whole constituency, your staff, and so forth all together when you're making decisions about what you do. This is the first time that I kind of get to, as an individual, within my consulting firm, to pick and choose the work that I want to do, to seek the kind of things that I want to do, to build that type of work as well, to work with other free radicals, because I'm now a free radical out here. So there's a whole group of folks that call themselves free radicals. So I'm a part of that club now, and just getting to dream, and getting to hone in on really going back to some of my roots, going back to agency as plantation and building that out. That's what I've been doing.
Agency as plantation. We are definitely going to have that conversation as you continue to build that out. We're going to have you come back. I'm going to have you come back for sure. You talked a little bit about the dream. Of course, this is Dreamers Unite after all.
Yes.
We definitely want to talk a little bit about, was this your dream?
So there were two dreams.
You're living your calling and your purpose.
There are two dreams I had. And if you're talking about little tiny dreams. So as a tiny person, I would say, 5, 6, 7, 8, I wanted to be an NFL player. I wanted to be a running back, because I love to run. I love to play football with the fellas. That I was always out there. And so eventually I became a cheerleader and basketball player and other things. So that didn't continue, but I always wanted to do that. And what's ironic is that now I have been an advisor to the NFL. My previous organization has had funds with the NFL, and I've done work and sat at the table with Roger Goodell, not sat at the table, but sit virtually at the table with him. But I've been in spaces. No, I have been at the table with Roger Goodell. What am I saying? I have been there. And so I've got a picture with him. What am I talking about? So I've got a range of things. So that's one trajectory that, while I didn't get to play a running back, I actually then got to have a connection with the NFL. So I was manifesting when I was a kid.
You were manifesting. So I love the fact that you were thinking of being a running back. I never knew.
I thought I was something. Wow. So I wanted to do that.
I love it.
But the other real dream I wanted to have, that I had, was always just to help people. Mm-hmm. I owe it all. I owe all of this sort of approach to my mama. I'm going to give a shout out to my mom.
Shout out to mom. Shout out, Mom.
Leila Coleman Crawford. And then I'm going to give a shout out to my kid, Tonya Lovelace. These are people in my life who keep me real, keep me grounded and focused. But my mom, who has always been the cornerstone of communities we've been in. And she's always been the person that people came to. And she was always, I had to say, cool mom. My mom was like really, truly the cool mom. She was the one that was around when some of the craziest things were happening to kids. And as a project kid, we were in the projects for a good chunk of my development. And the things that we saw and the things we experienced, and the way my mother did that and experienced that with such grace, is how I learned that I too wanted to be somebody who helped people. So yes, I am living that. I am living the dream. I owe it to my mama. And I think she would say she owe it to her daddy. And I think, it just kind of goes back. And so I'm feeling like I do really feel like I am my ancestors' dream, right?
Yes, I feel like that too. I do. That gives me goosebumps when you said that. I feel like that too, that we are our ancestors' dream, and we're God's dream.
And we're God's dream and God's anointing, right? It's like, I just feel so blessed, that I continue and can continue to do this work in the various ways that I want to. It's I'm just blessed. I'm blessed with the voice. I'm blessed with the experiences. I'm listening to, and have a friend of mine, and we're listening to or participating in series right now that is really talking about women, dunamis women. That's what I'm doing right now with my friend. And one of the things that they talk about is, you know, really your anointing and your
Mm,
power and holding on to it. And also knowing that that all of the experiences you've had up until now have gotten you to where you are. You know,
yeah.
I became a survivor of domestic violence while I was the CEO of a national organization that addresses domestic violence. It can happen to anybody, right? And yet I also understand that, you know, I was already a survivor of child sexual assault,
Mhm.
in various forms, you know, of child abuse. I've begun to claim that as well, of bullying, of teen dating violence. And so I've had a full range of things, and then became a late experience person who experienced domestic violence. And so I've come to understand that all of those experiences have led me to where I am now. And I just hope that that, you know, I do think, I believe that God is that this is to God's glory, that whatever I say and do is really going to bring glory to God. So that's what's important.
Yes, and I want to tell you that Cece Falls said, "Wow, I am learning all this stuff about you too that she didn't know either."
Oh, wow.
And Layla Coleman Crawford,
That's my mama.
there she is. Hi, Mom. She said, "Right back at you, Tonya Lovelace. I love you." So
Ooh, she's trying to make me cry on here.
I know I almost am
I'm
going to
holding it.
cry myself. You know, the mom thing gets my heart, right? I'm a mom of
Yes.
3. Um, Tonya, this has been informative, enlightening, compassionate, authentic, um, just a really beautiful conversation that literally was trying to give us a hard time in the beginning.
And you said, step back. You know,
That
we're
because
not
you
having
know
that.
what? That's right. At the end of the day, there's a lot going on out here. People are being hurt. People are hurting. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of loss. There's a lot of trauma. So that little incident in the beginning, as I told Tonya, I was like, that is not going to stop us.
No,
If we're going to get shaken over that, come on. We are,
listen.
yeah, no, we have a much greater calling and impact to make. I have one more final question for you.
Yes.
So it's not really a question, is I'm going to ask you to complete a sentence.
Okay.
I believe I came to this planet to
Use my voice to support those on the margins of the margins, and to create collective freedom and collective liberation.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Yes. And you certainly have done that. Tonya Lovelace, I'm so honored that you have been with us. Thank you so much again for your time, your insights, your expertise, your words, your offerings. We appreciate them all. I thank you all for joining us, for joining me. And I'm going to make one more request again. Hey, hit that subscribe button if you haven't subscribed. Share it out. Tell a friend or two, again, for more uplifting, elevating, and informative content. I appreciate each and every one of you. And I want to thank you, dreamers, for joining me. And I'll see you again next time. Tonya, thank you again.
Oh, thank you, Sherri. I appreciate it. This is a beautiful show. You're a beautiful sister, and I appreciate you for everything.
Right back at you, sister. That's all we can do now is this virtual kisses now, right?
Yes, yes,
Thank
yes.
you again. Goodbye, dreamers. Thanks all.